guys, gals, I guess we've got a couple gals here, mainly guys. I can't thank you guys enough for coming out on this beautiful sunny Sunday afternoon. We drove in from Lexington, Kentucky, and I thought we should stop and possibly inquire upon an ark. It was raining so hard today. I'm Phil Bradbury. I build the Little Walter tube amps. I was asked earlier why the name Little Walter, and basically I was in the mining industry and I have a broadcasting degree, and of course when you graduate with a broadcasting degree you go right into the coal mining industry. That's another whole long story, but I did a TV interview and a guy, one of my foremen back in Eastern Kentucky, said, "Boy," said, "you look just like Little Walter." It was in the 70s, as in Walter Cronkite. So that stuck with me in Eastern Kentucky, and so that's why I named it Little Walter. I'm usually asked that. But what I want to do, mainly I want you guys to hear the amps. I want you to play them. That's what we're here for. We've got several different ones. But before I do that, I'd like to give you my philosophy. Why, for instance, I'm building amps. Why the need, when there's so many amps being built today, that I feel the need to build an amp. And I love to share this with you. About five and a half years ago, I was recording a little CD. It was on my bucket list. I'd written a few songs in my life and I wanted to record them. Not for anything, but just to have them. And in doing that, I got really frustrated with the tone that I was getting out of the amplifiers that I own. And I've always been a builder. I've built custom bikes, cars. I have to constantly be building stuff. Just like this gentleman here showing me pictures of his handmade guitars, and I'm sure a lot of you feel that way. And so I thought, well, why are these old amps that are so famous that we all try to find and buy used, what is special about them compared to what we have today? So after about 8 or 10 manuals about that thick over the course of several months of reading, I developed, I filled a yellow pad up, and it was a list of all the things that I feel like that we have done wrong since the late 40s or 50s in the amp industry. Now, again, I want to preface this is my opinion. What I say up here, I'm not saying, boy, I'm right and everybody else is wrong. This is just my opinion. So season what I tell you with the fact that what I've learned is what I've studied. In the beginning, we took a chassis and we wired it together with cloth wire, and we put the components in, and we didn't have a circuit board. No one knew what a circuit board was. That came along when we were trying to build faster, quicker, turn out 500 a week, and so these are the kind of things that when corporate gets involved in anything, I don't think it gets better. That's just my thought. But what I did was I noticed that in the early days of tubes, we used octal tubes. That's 8-pin tubes. And if you buy any standard amp today that you go in and buy at a music store, it's usually going to have 9-pin preamp tubes. If it's a Fender, it'll have octal power tubes, a 6L6 or a 6V6 or even a 6550. But the preamp tubes are all going to be the little 9-pin mini tubes, the 12AT7, the Y7, or the X7, or a variant of it. Well, I read something that an amp builder wrote years and years ago, and he said he didn't know why we ever got away from octal tubes, because what you lose in gain, in volume, you make up for in dynamic response. And in other words, if you're a Vince Gill or a Brent Mason or a Paul Franklin, and you've got such a control of your hands, which I will never in this lifetime have, you can play a very pretty line and dig in. Just dig in a little bit, and an octal tube will accent that for you. And to me, the real difference between a musician and a great musician is his control or her control of dynamics. It's another dimension to the playing. So then I noticed that a circuit board becomes a capacitor. And so that's a component you don't even need in an amp, is a circuit board. Now the other thing is, you'll notice my amps usually have two knobs, volume and tone. I remember Reggie Young, who I guess you guys all know Reggie Young, I hope. He bought the very first amp that I ever sold. And the first comment was, "Am I right that just has volume and tone?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "Oh, God, I love that." He said, "The last amp I got had a booklet with it that was the size of a catalog." And he says, "And I still cannot get that thing adjusted." And here's my thoughts on it. The shortest possible signal path is the purest possible tone. Now, once again, if you play certain kind of hard rock, or you play a different genre of music than what I'm going for, you may actually want to go counter to what I'm telling you today. But what I'm after is the purest, fattest tone, and I do not want to color your instrument. When you buy a steel guitar or a six-string, a Strat, a Tele, a Les Paul, a Paul Reed Smith, when you buy an instrument and put money in it, you have to amplify it. Now, when I was a kid in high school, none of us had the money. Only the rich kids had the Fenders, you know, and we'd go to the music store and plug in and see what they felt like. But the rest of us, we would buy the biggest amp we could afford, the loudest amp we could afford is what we would buy. No thought whatsoever to what that amp was going to do to your instrument. You just had to have an amp to play. And the bass player and the drummer are this loud, so I've got to get an amp that's loud enough to match the bass player and the drummer. So that's basically what all my life that I thought an amplifier was. Well, my buddy Paul Franklin told a guy one night at the station inn, he says, "This is not an amplifier, this is an instrument." And I would feel a little bit bragging saying that, but coming from someone like Paul Franklin, I do quote him, because I was very pleased he said that. And Vince Gill will tell you that it doesn't cover his instrument. He said, "I can hear exactly what my guitar sounds like coming through this." And what I equate that to is the short signal path, octal preamp tubes, the fact that there's nothing in there that doesn't have to be, and I use really good quality signal caps. Now, would you all believe that every once in a while I'm mentioned on the forum? And I love reading those things, most of those things. But guys, if you buy a Fender amp, and I am a fan of Leo Fender, so you never hear me badmouth any other person's amp.